You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 15th of January 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. Coming up on today's programme, we'll catch up with the latest developments in South Korea after the arrest of the president this morning.
I've decided to respond to the CIO investigation, despite it being an illegal investigation.
Mozambique is in turmoil today as the new president is finally inaugurated 3 months after the hotly disputed elections. Then,
highly abstract art attracts huge crowds. It's so abstract and so conceptual that you can actually forget everything and just enjoy the beauty of it.
We'll hear about the urban light art festival Lux Helsinki, get the latest business news, and we'll have a roundup of design stories. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Georgina Godwin. We begin the show in South Korea, where Yoon Suk Yeol has become the first sitting president to be arrested. His detention came after a dramatic hours-long standoff with his security staff and supporters and investigators who finally gained access to his residence this morning using ladders and wire cutters. This is the latest development in a political crisis triggered by Yoon's failed attempt to impose martial law last month, for which he was impeached. Well, we're joined now by Dr. Edward Howell, who's lecturer in politics at Christ Church, Oxford, and author of North Korea and the Global Nuclear Order. Edward, many thanks for joining us on The Briefing. How did events unfold? What led up to Yoon's arrest early this morning?
Well, this has been an ongoing drama for nearly a month now. In fact, just over a month. We had the initial declaration of martial law on the 3rd of December, which was short-lived. It was subsequently retracted by Yoon in line with the Constitution and due process, having been voted down by South Korean members of parliament. So in another historic moment for South Korean politics, albeit not for the right reasons, the first acting president, Han Duck-soo, was also impeached on the grounds of collusion and being complicit in Yoon's initial declaration of martial law. So the current acting president, formerly the finance minister, is holding the reins of power at the moment. So there's been a combination of political turmoil in South Korea on the part of the ruling party, the People Power Party, the Conservative Party, but also ongoing divisions and factionalism between the ruling party and the leftist opposition. And this is only likely to exacerbate after Yoon's arrest. I think something we must bear in mind is that Yoon was no popular leader even before the martial law declaration. But interestingly, in the past couple of weeks, his approval ratings have in fact increased. They've experienced an uptick, which perhaps highlights the frustration and anger on the part of South Korean citizens.
What does this arrest this morning pertain to, and how did it happen? It sounded quite dramatic.
It was very dramatic, and for Yoon, it was very traumatic, I think we can say. Over 1,000 members of the arrest team tried to enter his residence. They even had to use hiking trails to try and gain access both to the compound and to the president himself. And Yoon is basically being arrested for two reasons. The first is in line with the impeachment. He has failed to attend summonses. The impeachment trial, which started yesterday, lasted for only 4 minutes because Yoon simply did not attend. But the second point is to do with charges of insurrection. And so if these charges of insurrection are proven, then Yoon is likely to face imprisonment.
He remains South Korea's head of state as the country's constitutional court deliberates on whether to approve his impeachment or reinstate him in office. As you say, that the trial began yesterday. It ended almost immediately. It picks up again tomorrow. He's going to have to be there this time.
Yes, and I think more broadly, beyond domestic politics, now is a time of great importance for South Korea. We have a new administration in Tokyo under Ishiba Shigeru, and obviously in less than 1 week's time, Donald Trump will be inaugurated as the President of the United States. And so now really is not a good time for South Korea to become overwhelmed by domestic turmoil and domestic tumult, important as it is for the South Korean people and for South Korean politics, given these changes that we're seeing on the part of South Korea's allies and partners in a world that is becoming increasingly threatening, not least regionally, with respect to North Korea and with respect to China.
South Korea is Asia's fourth largest economy. Has this shaken confidence in the democratic integrity of the country?
It will no doubt have shaken some confidence, and particularly given how President Yoon's big axiom as leader was that South Korea needed to step up in its status as a global pivotal state. And central to that was the idea that South Korea was to uphold values of freedom, of peace, of prosperity, and of course democracy. So what we're seeing now is really something that is perhaps showing two things. On the one hand, democracy is resilient and it's working. The fact that the initial declaration of martial law was revoked in line with the Constitution shows that the due process is functioning and is alive and well. But somewhat paradoxically, the actions of the past week or so do highlight that democracy is also rather fragile as well. So there is a sort of odd paradox here between the resilience of democracy but also its fragility as well.
Finally, Edward, you mentioned that his popularity has been increasing. We also know that there were a large amount of his supporters surrounding his residence during his arrest this morning. How divided, then, is the South Korean community for and against Yoon?
The division is very clear. The South Korean political left and the political right are very divided. But it is not just that. I think it's also there is also a division within the ruling People Power Party and amongst Yoon's supporters. We only have to look at how the party voted in response to his initial impeachment and his the two votes they had to impeach him. I think we need to remember that for many South Koreans who support President Yoon, they view the extent to which his detractors have tried to arrest him and succeeded today, this is not the first time they have tried, as a little bit of a high-handed maneuver, something that, in their view, was not strictly necessary. We also need to remember that Yoon's detractors have never really liked him from the outset and remained very determined, and still do remain determined, for his ouster.
Edward, thank you very much indeed. That was Dr. Edward Howell there. Now, here's Laura Kramer with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Georgina. Russia has fired more than 100 missiles and drones at Ukraine's energy sites overnight. The attack follows Kyiv's claim of its largest strike yet on Russian factories and energy hubs. Talks to secure a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas have intensified. Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S. are leading efforts to release hostages from the October 7th attack. Washington and Cairo are urging flexibility from both sides. And train drivers in Japan are now wearing sunglasses as part of their uniforms. The new gear reduces fatigue and improves visibility for safer journeys. East Japan Railways says tests show it helps the 7,000 drivers on its network. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Georgina.
Thank you, Laura. You're back with the briefing on Monocle Radio. Today, Daniel Chapo becomes the first president of Mozambique not to have fought in the country's war of independence. His inauguration comes more than 3 months after disputed elections, which sparked lethal demonstrations. Well, joining me down the line from Cape Town is the Mozambique analyst for Africa Risk Consulting, Brendan van Essen. Brendan, thanks for coming on the show. Can you tell us why the elections were so controversial?
Hi, Georgina, and thanks for having me on. So the Mozambique elections were very controversial this time, largely because they were disputed. The elections on 9th of October were marked by wide irregularities, including reports by observers that some results had been changed at district stations. And this has obviously led the opposition to dispute the elections and lead to over 2 months of protests.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about those protests? What's happened in the country since the election?
Since the election, there's been widespread unrest. So this election was led by a new opposition leader called Venancio Mondlane, who contested the election as an independent candidate, backed by other political parties, most notably Podemos. And when Mondlane refused to accept the results, he called for protest and was met by widespread support amongst opposition supporters, which in turn government security forces responded in a heavy-handed manner, which has led to widespread unrest, violence, including an estimated over 280 deaths in the country. This has caused deeply deteriorated Mozambique security situation and led to deep concerns of a deeper political crisis.
The inauguration is going ahead. What's Chapo's background? Can he turn the country around?
So Daniel Chapo is actually quite an interesting figure. So he was only elected to lead the ruling party Frelimo last year. And he's currently, or prior to his election as president-elect, and as of today, president, he was the governor of Inhambane. But he only really entered formal politics in Mozambique in about 2009. So by Mozambican standards, he's a very young leader. And one of the reasons it is believed that Frelimo chose to go with him is that by being quite a new entry to politics and a young leader, he's untainted by most of the political scandals that have roiled Frelimo and Mozambique in recent years, most notably the $2 billion secret debt scandal that emerged in 2016. Whether or not he can turn Mozambique around is very much an open question. He will bring in a new crop of younger leaders and obviously will over the coming time cement his control over the party and the country. But it must still be remembered that he is still very much a Frelimo man, and Frelimo still, as a party, maintains institutional power in Mozambique. So I don't expect any kind of major substantial or revolutions, but Mozambique does have good economic fundamentals going forward, especially with the development of the gas reserves in the north of the country.
Well, about the north of the country, how can he address that insurgency?
Okay. So it's going to be particularly very challenging on him because the insurgency has entered a new stage where it's now very much gone down to lower guerrilla warfare, decentralized cells, where insurgent groups no longer really control territory, so to speak. So in order to do that and to really address insurgency, his best bet is going to have to address the fundamentals that led to the insurgency in the first place. That means dealing with youth unemployment, economic marginalization of communities in northern Mozambique, and ensure that a lot of those natural resources that are resplendent up there in Cabo Delgado are better distributed amongst communities and that they actually feel invested in the economic success and stability of the region itself.
Do you think that the opposition will ever accept his win, or will this violence and the divisions simmer on?
The violence and divisions are definitely going to continue over the short term. It is likely that eventually some form of compromise will be met. Key to this is Venancio Mondlane himself, and he seems, while he's been very steadfast in his refusal to accept the result, he has intimated that he would be open to some form of dialogue. And with the right concessions from the government, the opposition, or at least specifically Mondlane, could be brought to accept it. An important development did happen on Monday where Podemos, which is now the largest opposition party and was officially aligned with Mondlane, even though he's not actually a member of that party, ahead of this election, they actually attended the swearing-in of parliament, which does indicate that there's beginnings of a divide within the opposition and how it believes it should go forward. So I do think within the coming months and following a dialogue, some form of compromise will be reached.
Right. Now, he is being inaugurated today. Have you any sense of what's actually happening within the country?
Well, thus far, as it stands, it's been I suppose I should say, comparatively peaceful. So there have been protests, a lot of unrest. Security is very heightened in Maputo, naturally with the arrival of several international and regional dignitaries and leaders. But there will be demonstrations, there will be protests, and we are expecting definitely more to happen in the coming days.
Brendan Van Essen, thank you very much. I'm just going to cross over now to Tavares Cebola, who's actually in Maputo. Tavares, can you tell us what the atmosphere is like on the ground there?
Well, today it was expected because the opposition leader called for demonstrations today, but Maputo woke up with highly militarized with police presence on the streets, especially in the areas surrounding the Independence Square where the inauguration happened. It already happened. The now President Daniel Chapo was sworn in this morning. The city is quiet. You see roadblocks in some places with military presence and the police as well, and shops and the public administration are closed. It's expected because, as I said earlier, the opposition leader Venancio Mondlane, who claims he actually won the elections, called for demonstrations, and it is expected that later in the afternoon there'll be some hot spots for demonstrations. This morning, what happened in the surroundings of the area where the president was sworn in, dozens of young people were basically chanting. These are opposition supporters were chanting and denouncing the new elected president and saying basically, you will not govern us. And at some point, police fired tear gas to disperse these protesters.
So you expect this to continue then?
Yes. I think even though over the past 48 hours, there are signs that negotiations have started between the main opposition leader and opposition parties in general with the government, with the new elected president. So it seems to me that those negotiations will continue in the next few days, and it's likely that a deal will be reached. However, the opposition leader, the candidate who claims he actually won the elections, they threatened on a live stream yesterday that he will call for more protests if the police keep shooting protesters. And since this protest started in October last year, right after the election day, human rights groups say 300 people have been killed, most of them by police. And across the country, even in recent days, there have been cases where police fired tear gas or even gunfire. And so the opposition leader said if the police react this way, he will call for more protests, or if some of his demands, because he sent a letter with some demands for reforms in political reforms, constitutional reforms, but as well as reforms in the election bodies or the election commission. And he says the government should meet some of those demands in order for him to call for demonstrations to stop.
Tavares, thank you very much indeed. That's Tavares Cebola there in Maputo. Next, we head to Finland to learn more about Lux Helsinki, a popular urban light art festival that wrapped up on Sunday and attracts over 500,000 visitors each year. Our Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsov spoke to both the city's mayor as well as the event's organiser to learn more about the role that light art can play during the dark Nordic winters and what makes the event, now in its 16th edition, so popular.
Anyone who has spent both summers and winters in Helsinki or any other Nordic city knows how much they change from season to season. During the warm summer months, the sun never sets and the cities are bursting with life and endless energy. But come winter, life often moves indoors as temperatures drop below zero and there are only a few hours of daylight in a day. In 2009, the city of Helsinki launched Lux Helsinki, a festival of light art that saw public works of art light up the city's streets and parks during the darkest time of the year. It was an immediate success and has been ever since. This year, the 5-day event attracted over 500,000 visitors, which is almost the city's entire population, to admire the 20 light artworks scattered around the city. The artworks came in all shapes and sizes and were done by local and international artists alike. The UK-based Illumophonium erected a large installation next to the main railway station, which consisted of a geometric matrix of mirrored and luminescent sonic monoliths that visitors could interact with. The Finnish artist Kari Kalo transformed the wintry landscape of Helsinki's Esplanade Park into a green oasis of summery sounds, lighting up the park's trees and filling the air with bird sounds. The Danish art collective Vertigo installed an 80-meter-long triangular light tunnel on the Senate Square, which synced a light performance with music performed by the Royal Danish Orchestra, and through which the visitors were encouraged to walk. I caught up with Stuba Nikula, the CEO of the Helsinki Events Foundation, who organizes Lux Helsinki, and asked him about the kind of art on display, as well as the challenges posed by the harsh Finnish winter.
Light art is actually an interesting form of art. It's very young, but it's really actually the most abstract and conceptual form of art. And it's kind of ridiculous that this really highly abstract art attracts huge crowds. It's so abstract and so conceptual that you can actually forget everything and just enjoy the beauty of it.
When you commission these international artists, are they sometimes surprised by the weather? I mean, I remember last year at Lux it was probably like minus 20 and lots of snow. Is that something you have to tell them, like, hey, this is Finland?
Yeah, that is the first thing we tell them, that, look at the weather maps, and then we share them some ideas that, this didn't work and this actually did work. But because they all run on electricity, they have to keep them warm, and there's loads of computers on all of those, so they can't freeze.
Lux Helsinki only lasts a couple of days each winter, and while it is immensely popular, people have sometimes lamented the fact that the artworks are taken away so soon. This year, the city announced that it would purchase some of the artworks on display and make them a more permanent fixture on Helsinki's wintry cityscape. I caught up with Helsinki's art-loving mayor, Juhana Vartiainen, to find out more.
Yeah, that's correct. That's a new cooperation between our urban planning division and this festival. And guided by our Helsinki Art Museum, our urban planning division will purchase some of these works and then perhaps put them on display in the years to come. So and in that way make this a permanent feature of the city. It's dark a large part of the year in these latitudes, in this part of the world. And now we have understood that we shall make this into an asset. light art and animations, light sculptures, they only work well in the dark. And in that way we can make Helsinki a particularly interesting place to be during the dark months of the year.
As you know, Helsinki boasts a great cultural offering. There is lots of world-class art museums as well as venues for classical music, opera and dance. But when we think about public art in particular, and Lux Helsinki is very much a display of public art, what role does public art play in Helsinki's culture scene?
Well, one of the philosophies that we have in our arts and culture offerings is that they must be accessible to everyone. And these light sculptures are a prime example of that. And we have found that they garner a very, very varied audience. Young people, old people, many people like to take a promenade in the city in the dark months now and take a look at these new art forms. And for many young people, it can be quite formative. Young people tend to be interested in things that they have seen when they were young and got acquainted with the city life.
For Monocle in Helsinki, I'm Petri Burtsov.
Many thanks there to Petri. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now it's time to get a roundup of some of the day's business stories with Ewan Potts from Bloomberg, who's currently in Dubai. Ewan, hello to you. Some welcome news for the UK on inflation after the recent sell-off. Tell us more.
Hello, Georgina. Yes, in case you missed it, the big market story over the past week has been a tantrum by the bond market. This has been all over the world, particularly driven by the United States, whose economy is growing so strongly. There are fears amongst bond investors that there will not be the interest rate cuts that they were expecting at the beginning or rather late last year over the course of this year. But the bond market, if it was a person, would be a bit of a bully, really. It likes to pick on the weak kid in the class. And the weak kid in the class was the UK. Bond yields on government debt, the benchmark yields rising to the highest level in 17 years. Not good news for an economy looking to borrow more money. But there was welcome news on inflation today. The UK's inflation reading coming in lower than expected, particularly core inflation and services inflation. The overall inflation rate came in at 2.5%. That's how much prices are higher now than they were a year ago. But it was services inflation which really undershot. And services is the most sticky part of inflation. That's domestically driven inflation. It's not really to do with external factors. And there was welcome news on that. About half of that was actually down to lower airfares. Not that you would have noticed if you've taken a plane recently, but the data shows that apparently airfares have been rising less quickly. But the rest of it was more wide-based services inflation, which is not as bad as was feared. So that's some welcome news for the UK. We're also getting US inflation reading later on today. That's the bit of data that people are really looking out for. That's expected to show that prices are not coming down anytime soon in the US, or price rises are not coming down anytime soon. The economy is still doing very well in the United States. And if you're looking for a bit of good news, then don't go across the channel to Germany. Data out today from the biggest economy in Europe showed that the German economy contracted for a second straight year last year, and 2025 not looking much better either. It's actually only the second time since 1950 that the German economy has contracted 2 years on the trot. So things looking pretty ropey over in Germany as well.
And what about in Dubai? From where you are in the world, there's a big announcement on green energy.
Yeah, quite interesting this. Probably fair to say that most Middle Eastern states are not angels when it comes to climate change. But for a country which has built its wealth on hydrocarbons, it's now very successfully investing that elsewhere. But a lot of the money originally came from extracting fossil fuels. The UAE has got big ambitions when it comes to green energy. An announcement that it's building a $6 billion mega solar and battery project to provide green electricity to Dubai and the rest of the Emirates. It's really quite a scale, this project. It's going to be over 90 square kilometres in the Abu Dhabi desert. Just picture that. That's 10 kilometres by 10 kilometres of solar panels. Pretty enormous. But the really fascinating thing is the battery power to go with it. Because, of course, not a secret that solar power is only useful when the sun is shining. And the sun does shine here a lot. But we do have nighttime in Dubai as well. And for when the sun isn't shining, they're going to be building a huge amount of battery storage as well. In fact, 19 gigawatt hours of battery storage. And just to put that in a bit of context, the world's biggest solar and battery storage facility, which is currently in Nevada in the United States, has 1.4 gigawatt hours of storage. So it's going to be 10 times bigger than the biggest project which exists at the moment. So a hugely ambitious solar battery project here in the United Arab Emirates.
Ewan Potts, thank you very much indeed. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And finally on today's show, a roundup of the latest design news with Samantha Tsay, a writer, editor and consultant. Samantha, welcome back. We start in Paris. Tell us what's going on there today.
Well, hello. Yes, Paris Design Week and Maison&Objet is kicking off today. And here's a preview of some of the new products and happenings that I think we shouldn't miss. So what's really great about Paris Design Week is that it encompasses both Maison&Objet and Paris Deco Off. And this year's theme being fashion and deco, deco and fashion. And there's an unprecedented amount of collaboration between fashion design schools, Elmod International. So some of the highlights that I think are the iconic British department store Liberty of London is celebrating its 150th year at a gallery space on Rue de Seine. And it will be unveiling its new House of Liberty collection, which gives nod to the important moments in the store's history, drawing from its archive of over 60,000 pieces. So it's divided into 3 chapters. You've got the Arts Club, which has designs referencing, like bohemian botanicals and a decorative glamour. You have Townhouse, which surveys the aesthetic moment and the Art Nouveau period. And the Painter's House, which is an exploration of folklore-inspired florals, geometrics, and stripes. You also have Christophe, which has just had its first retrospective at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris. And they are going to be launching a new ultra-contemporary collection of candle holders and candlesticks called Perspective, which is designed by Matthias Kiss. And that's going to be available to view at their store on Saint Honoré. And there's also, I think it's really cool, is going to be Studio Eric Schmidt. He's going to present his collection called Taupière, which is outdoor furniture. And it's got these beautiful rugs and seats made from, perennial fabrics, chairs and consoles made from wood, as well as like vases, side tables made from bohemian blown glass. There are also these really beautiful pieces made from breccia stone and new outdoor bronze chairs that have been upholstered in waterproof fabrics, and as well as an all-wood dining chair.
It all sounds absolutely beautiful. Tell us what Designer of the Year Faye Toogood's getting up to.
So Faye Toogood was named Designer of the Year, and she's going to be presenting her Women Festo show at the Maison&Objet, which is actually outside Paris, close to Gare du Nord in an exposition center. And she's going to be, inviting people to sort of delve into her creative mind, and she's deconstructing her creative process for people to see. So this is a great moment for the studio to highlight some of her own work alongside important design collaborations with companies such as the Calico Wallpaper Company. And one of the highlights will be the Muse Wallpaper Collection, which celebrates the diversity of women.
And finally, let's have a look at this auction that's taking place in Paris on January the 27th. What can you tell us about that?
So exciting. So this is going to be the largest single auction of Martin Margiela ever held. And this is going to be a collaboration between Carrie Taylor Auctions in Paris and Chez Maurice Carrie Taylor Auctions in London and Chez Maurice in Paris. So there's going to be close to 300 lots, and it's really focusing on the early years between 1988 and 1994. Now, all of these lots belong to a pair of sisters named Angela and Elena Picozzi, who gathered them over, decades, inspired by their mother, Graziella, who was a key figure in the Italian fashion industry. So what's really interesting about this early collection is that it's an archive, unique in its composition, but also many of these pieces have never been worn, and some of them are still in its original packaging. And I think that's going to be amazing, because I don't think that I've ever come across an auction that has Margiela pieces in its original packaging from the early years.
Now, that sounds absolutely extraordinary. So, you know what? We've got to mark our diaries there for January the 27th. Samantha Say, thank you very much indeed. And that's all we have time for on this edition of The Briefing, which was produced by Tom Webb. Our researcher was Maisie Ringer and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing's back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Georgina Godwin. Goodbye and thanks for listening.